Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue in Beijing. The Law of the Sea Tribunal issued a verdict on Tuesday on a case brought by the Philippines. Well, to counter the Chinese claims in the South China Sea, Beijing insists that Manila's case is an issue of territorial sovereignty over which the tribunal has no jurisdiction. Will the ruling bring new tensions to relations between the two countries? How should China respond to this current ruling right now? What is the responsible course of action in the South China Sea? And do Washington and Beijing have the capacity to find a way out of the differences right now? Today we are joined in the studio by Mr. Ye Hailin from the China Academy of Social Sciences and Professor Zhu Feng, Director of the China Center for Collaborative Studies of the South China Sea at Nanjing University. But before we go, let's take a look at this.
中方不赞成菲律宾外交部提起国际仲裁的做法，并且已经表明了明确反对的立场。我们要求菲律宾方面 停止错误的做法。
中方不接受菲律宾方面提出的仲裁有充分的国际法依据。
这个裁决是无效的，对中方没有拘束。
由于仲裁庭对这个案件没有管辖权，明显没有管辖权，那么一个无权的机构做出的裁决，当然不具有任何的法律效力，也不存在承认和执行的问题。
Well, the tribunal said there was no legal basis for China to claim historical rights to resources within the areas falling within China's 9-dash line. The Chinese government says China has sovereignty and historical rights in the region. The Foreign Ministry says China does not accept the ruling, saying it is null and void and has no binding force. It says territorial issues are not subject to UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And let's talk about the final rulings of the arbitration tribunal. It basically says everything against China. No historical rights, 9-dash line has no legal basis, and China actually has no islands in the South China Sea that has the feature to support its territorial claims. What do you think of the verdict? Did it surprise you, Mr. Zhu?
No, I don't think the verdict surprised me because there's a lot of the sign was previously the tribunal would just go a very long way. They also challenge the China's historical sovereignty claim, and also present some way with complying with the Western views and some sort of ideas on how sovereignty could just project it. But we say the China's South China Sea claim is combination of history and legalism. So then no one can just make the two things completely in separation. Otherwise, I think it will be a very reckless denial of the China's sovereign claim in South China Sea, and also will be a very reckless denial of some sort of historical feasibility of the China's sovereign claim. For that regard, I really think we say it's a tribunal awards. It's some sort of very legal term. In other words, we usually say it's a tribunal ruling or it's a verdict. But whatever its name is, we also have to conclude that way. It is truly some sort of a politicization movement, just not attempting to, we say, challenge the China's sovereignty claim, but also the lack to very forcefully and also very, we say, very wrongfully pose some sort of such a oversimplification of the Western legalism over to the China's South China Sea sovereign claim. We consider it's not just some sort of distortion, but also is a very loose, disruption.
What do you think, Mr. Ye, of this verdict? Obviously, China saw this coming. That's why China didn't want to be part of this.
Of course. But the question is now for China is not how we read this final ruling. It's how we react towards this, and how the other partners, what their response, how they can use this final ruling, such as if Philippines want to use this we call the wasted paper, to launch some operation on the maritime, on the sea, there will be something different. Now it's the
Philippine official response is that they welcome such a
Of course, they will say they will welcome.
They ask for restraints for all the concerned parties.
But the question is that how they will do that towards such kind of the new situation, whether they will launch some operation against China's interest and the presence in the South China Sea, or they just talk. So it's quite different things. If they talk, means they know actually they are actually just a waste paper. So this means something different. But if they want to do something based on such kind of the final ruling, they will change all the arena totally in the different direction.
We understand the PCA actually has no enforcement mechanism. It doesn't have a police force or military to make sure the enforcement of the verdict is coming through. So there is no enforcement of this award.
No, of course it is. But I have to say it's not the ruling from the PCA. PCA is a very official setting according to the UN UNCLOS, it's a UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. This tribunal is some sort of setup based on the Appendix 7 of the UNCLOS. So it's some sort of a tentative, tribunal process, and also consisting of some sort of, we say, the judges from the different countries. So it's a very tentative. It's of course a judicial, but it's not a very informal.
But what kind of impact it will have on the country's behavior in the future? For example, how will Philippines take up this verdict? How will China respond to this verdict?
Of course, China's,
what will U.S. do about this?
Yeah, I think the key difference between China and the U.S. is the U.S. would like to force the Beijing to take into account that. But from the Chinese perspective, we consider the ruling is totally abuse of the judicial power, because by nature, we say the Philippines firing against China is definitely concerned with some sort of a sovereign friction and the sovereign disputes. But UNCLOS really excludes itself from legally engaging some sort of such a sovereignty dispute related some sort of, we say, friction. So then when the tribunal just declares some sort of jurisdiction over Philippines filing vis-a-vis China, it's not just a cross a line, it's abuse of their judicial power. That's why the Beijing challenge the legality of the judicial, we say, the ruling over the China-Philippines
so
case.
from time on, it will probably be a battlefield of public opinions. China and some other countries will air their different views and ideas and values on what the problem is actually.
So you can see that the statement released by the central government of China will already answer the questions raised by the Philippines, but not on the request of the so-called arbitral tribunal. we answer this question that you want to know what's our request, what's our demand on the South China Sea. Okay, we will tell you. Firstly, we have the islands in the South China Sea, the 4 islands, Nansha, Xisha, Zhongsha, and Dongsha. And secondly, they have the territorial water. They have the EEZ. And thirdly, we have the historical right. That means all the questions, all the demands China raised is against so-called final ruling of the arbitrary tribunal. So we have the 2 different, totally opposite stance, China and Philippines.
But do we need to convince the rest of the
world?
world?
No, you don't need to
take
convince them.
opinions?
You have to implement such kind of the stance. That means now the question is not on the Hague, not on in Europe, in Netherlands. It's in the South China Sea. So we can. The situation only, anyone's stance is only be verified by what happened on the sea. If Philippines want to insist on their request, okay, send your troops, but they don't have. So they have to rely on another
But
country.
it will probably set a precedent for a dispute resolvement in the future. Do you think other countries in this part of the world, for example, Vietnam or even Brunei, Malaysia, will file similar complaints to the International Tribunal to resolve their differences with China?
It's hard to foretell what kind of the follow-up will be after the verdict come over. There's some sort of assumption Vietnam and other contending claimant state probably will continue to fight against China because they consider some sort of bigger legal support. But I don't see that way because you see, as Dr. Ye make very clear, that China will not accept it. China will not just implement it. So whatever follow-up the legal case will just coming over, then it could just very effectively affect China's basic stance over the South China Sea sovereign claim. I don't think so. So then, of course, on the one hand, we see this verdict is some sort of a horror bell. But on the other hand, I see it's some sort of, very alarming reminder to the region how such a territorial disputes could truly settle in. I think a realistic way is we need to sit down, talking, and creating some sort of a good political will and pulling both sides closer.
And do you think to show defiance and disobedience, will China further pursue other approaches like getting out of the UNCLOS, setting up identification zone, or building more facilities on Huangyan Dao?
It depends on, actually, I think get out of the UN clause is not an option because we have no opinion, no negative opinion towards the UN clause. We have opinion somebody abuse the UN clause. So how possible we get out of the UN clause and then say someone is abused? No, the question is that Philippines should correct their mistake, not China. So the out of the UN clause, I don't think this option. It's not a very rational response toward the current situation. But another option, it's highly possible. It depends on what the other partners, what are you going to do? If they want to implement their so-called right, get from the UN clause or get from the arbitrary tribunal, China has to respond something. That means it depends on
so China
what's
will
the
not
possible
take proactive measures.
No,
but
I don't think so. Yeah.
One after another, just trying to take a very radical response, showing their tough face. Then we will see there will be escalating tension. It's really helpless. So then, for example, withdrawal from UNCLOS, I can't agree with Dr. Ye. It will be option, but the problem is it's helpless and it's useless. So then, future how China could respond is much up to how action and reaction cycle will also just hitting back.
Mr. Ye mentioned maybe China will see what the other parties are taking actions at. One thing is what the Philippines' new administration is going to do about this award or verdict, because President Rodrigo Duterte has been saying he wants to talk to China, he wants to have economic cooperation, but not go to war. But whether or not he will follow through on his words is still a question. Do you think the Philippines will be softer on this stance with China?
The Duterte government has been soft already. the new president
not on
of
action,
the
only on words
of the
right now.
yeah the Philippines reset the term of their policy of China. It's very helpful, but the problem is Chinese also couldn't unrealistically expect Duterte government to completely switch the course, because territory disputes also will involve some sort of a very sensitive and emotional nationalism and other things. So we can help the Duterte government to continue to just moving on some sort of, we say, very productive path, rather than just to keep both sides apart.
But how do we define productive, constructive, if it is not turned 180 degrees?
Unless the Philippines stop to use such kind of the final ruling as their legal base for their request on the South China Sea, or they call the Western Philippine Sea, unless they stop using such kind of as their legal base, otherwise it won't be taken by China as they already shift their policy, because now it is only talk. You can't just you don't shift any stance on the South China Sea issue, and then you start just to talk. I want to open the gate with China. It's highly unlikely.
But actually, we can have some sort of new, we say, policy initiative. For example, a joint development of resources, including the fishing resources. Then it could be some sort of, we say, a very important signal of the diplomatic solution, then using this diplomatic solution and pushing aside the presumably just a verdict as some sort of a legal solution. But anyway, I see the China and the Philippines upcoming, we say, interaction will be very significant.
I think it's a little bit too early to say how we can make Philippines back to the right track, because it depends on what the Philippines going to use this final ruling towards China, or anything will happen on the South China Sea.
If we regard this, Philippines has already won the case in the tribunal. He can shelve this question and go into economic cooperation with China.
I don't think so, because they had to implement such kind of the final ruling.
But there is no way to implement.
Yeah, if they don't do anything, that's the only proof. That's kind of the final ruling. It's just a waste of paper.
Because they have I should say, the moral high ground in this debate, that they can go forward with the real substantial economic cooperation.
In this case, if they don't, they always thought they are the winner on the arbitrary tribunal. I don't think they can launch the essential base for the economic cooperation with China. But how possible? You say, I win the case against you, now we can open the gate, now we start to do the business.
Do you think it is easier or harder for the Philippines to cool down at this moment?
Of course, Philippines also have to cool down. Is there any way Philippines can enforce? If they just feel they're winner, then they can just oppose this, we say, the verdict into the China and make the Beijing, we say, koto or just back off. No way. But the problem is, don't just believe economic incentive could automatically, dramatically change the Philippines' position. So yes, on the one hand, economic relationship and the revitalization of economic, the engagement could help create the good conditions. But sovereignty issue usually has a lot to do, definitely, with what? With security, with some sort of, we say, national assets. So we should put the two things apart. One is, we really welcome Philippines' very pragmatic response. Don't just posture anyway, we are winner, you are loser, then nowhere we can talk. But on the other hand, how the bilateral relation could substantively improve. It's not just the economy only. We need also political rapprochement, we need a social trust and social, the context and getting them become a very massive. All such things putting together, then we can conclude it's a good, significant improvement of our relations. Probably will underscore some sort of, we say, realistic and a proper handling of verdict issues and other joint development issues.
Militarily, this part of the world, the temperatures have been rising. We see ships from China and the U.S. has been patrolling the South China Sea. Washington has repeatedly claims it is a freedom of navigation problem, but China says there is no problem at all with freedom of navigation. But do you think this kind of a military confrontation build-up will continue in the South China Sea, and how serious it would get?
It will continue because according to the statement released by the central government of China, we already said we have EEZ, we have the territorial water in the South China Sea. So that means we have the administration over the certain islands and the certain maritime seaface. So that means if Americans want to launch their so-called navigation freedom of navigation, and there will be two different opposite stance, and there will some potential crash. So it's not only on the China's hand that to avoid the military conflict. It's also on the hand of the United States.
So
if
they
send the troops
do you think with this
territory,
award coming out, the U.S. has more incentives to send more ships and planes to the South China Sea because
they can
don't
launch the
recognize
navigation freedom in anywhere, but not Chinese territory. So if now the China,
but they say the court says you have no
China's
special
central
zone.
government already makes a stance. This stance is our legal base. So that means American either respect or challenge such kind of stance, and then they will lead to the consequence. American could possibly they want to challenge the China stance, and they will face the consequence. They can't expect, okay, they send their troops, and there's no any consequence. It's highly unlikely.
What is your take?
Verdict indeed complicate some sort of military tension in South China Sea. If the Americans Pentagon just believe the verdict or such a tribunal award is some sort of a new justification.
If they believed in this and they
it's
can
a
send
new
more ships.
justification, yes, for their freedom navigation driven
But will
mission.
they, realistically?
No, we couldn't just very conclusively say they must do something or they mustn't do something, because it's also will be consequence of the action and reaction cycle between Beijing and Washington. So then for the moment, I have to say yes, we should be on vigil against any Americans some sort of a new military posture. They want to use the force in Beijing back down. But on the other hand, I don't think the real contents of some sort of South China Sea tension is very military. It's mostly or more diplomatic and legal, other than, we say, some sort of military, because it's useless. U.S. and China rarely have the intention to fight a war over the South China Sea. There's a very interesting, alarming reminder. Number one, number two, because the power were fighting over some sort of small rocks, inhabited reefs. It's so stupid. So for this moment,
Mr.
don't
Zhu is saying it is very unlikely that the U.S. and China will be embroiled in a conflict in the South China Sea because it is not the big picture of China-U.S. relations.
I would like to say it's not China should answer this question. It's Americans should think about the question, because we are in our territory. How possible we thinking on behalf of the United States to ask them to find out this answer, what they want. It's not what we want, because we don't have any option. This is our territory land. We have our rights, and this is our essential stance. Compared with navigation freedom, freedom of navigation is such kind of right, but not sovereignty. It's totally different issue. So if Americans want to implement the so-called navigation freedom, it's challenge China. But China, if want to ensure the safety of their territorial water and their territory, their islands, it not challenge Americans' rights, legal rights, even in the South China Sea. So the answer shouldn't come from China. It shouldn't come from America. Why the American want to launch a kind of a military confrontation against China because of so-called navigation freedom or not? It's not China should answer the question whether we will confront American because of our territory was
Mr.
challenged.
Ye mentioned one major problem in this dispute is the sovereignty issue, because actually we think the tribunal has no jurisdiction over a sovereignty issue. But the problem is what kind of a claim China is putting there for the sovereignty. Is it for the islands and the surrounding waters? Is it for all the South China Sea within the 9-dash line? That's something a lot of people are asking.
Of course, it's also a very controversial issue, but based on newly released the state governmental statement today, in response to the ruling, then we will see it's some sort of very interesting reconfirmation of China's sovereign claim and the maritime rights and the interest requestment. Then we will see.
And they are related, territorial claims and the maritime rights.
This statement offers some sort of a very legal base for us to understand what China really and genuinely, just a claim in South China Sea. First, we use the words which are Nanhai Zhudao. Nanhai Zhudao is very traditional Chinese naming. Then it's also very profound, deep reflection of the Chinese historical linkage between, we say, the governance of those South Chinese maritime features. So first of all, we have Nanhai Zhudao, including Dongsha, Xisha, Nansha, and we say Zhongsha. Then second is, I think that Dr. Ye also just mentioned, we also based on this maritime features, this Nanhai Zhudao. So we have territorial water, inner water, contiguous water. So it's all some sort of a sovereign rights. Then third one is very important. Based on this Nanhai Zhudao, then we have EEZ and the continental shelf. It's also some sort of a sovereignty extending some sort of maritime rights and interests. Last one, very important. We also reconfirm we have historical rights concerning fishing, some part of seabed resources, and even the navigation rights. So then all such things very clearly and firmly just reconfirmed and restated in today's Chinese official documents. I think that's a very good clarification of what China wants and the future's interaction, just how say going on in this South China Sea.
But this is China's understanding of the rights and the sovereignty issue. If the International Tribunal thinks otherwise, and if many people in the West think otherwise, how can China win support and seek cooperation?
We already have the 70 countries support.
But you have to get the support in this part of the world, especially in Southeast Asia.
I don't think, we already win the support from a lot of countries in the Southeast Asia. We are not alone. So the question is that China not alone. We already have the mass basis support, and our stance is not only for South China Sea, it's for the whole world. Such as the India has a similar demand on the coastal areas and the Indian Ocean, part of the Indian territory, the Indian Ocean part of them. So we are not fighting only for our interest. We are also fighting an international mechanism, an international order, how to maintain the legal base and the legal right of the coastal areas, coastal countries. So we can't say we have to win the support from the Western world. Because in this world, China, India, and Russia, we already have 4 billion people. It's not a minority, it's a majority. And if we calculate the country numbers, we have 70 countries support. It's also not a minority, because there's no 70 country clearly, publicly released a statement to support the Philippine stance. So who is minority in this case?
Mr. Zhu, do you think we have a strong coalition in support of our stance?
Of course we do. But the problem is, of course, we see the controversy of the verdict will still rippling in the coming days. It still will be simmering because I think the U.S. and the other powers like Japan will not just swallow some sort of a bitter fruit and tolerating the China's some sort of turn down or rejection, because they believe if Beijing could just take this verdict into account, then it's a very easy and effective way to keep China's maritime influence shrinking. But we emphasize we will not. So then I will see it's a new start of some sort of a diplomatic and even political wrestling.
1 year down the road, what do you think the South China Sea will be looking like?
I won't say it will be a calm down. I will see there was a lot of events will happen.
You too?
No, I don't think so. I think we could expect some sort of a cooler head on either side. I don't think the U.S. and China will overreact. So then we should learn how to calm down. That's most important.
Different opinions. We'll keep a close watch on this part of the world. Thank you for watching Dialogue. I'm Zhu in Beijing. Goodbye.